As the country marks 16 days of activism for no violence against women and children tomorrow, there are calls for drastic action to reduce the scourge of gender-based violence. And of course, looking at the crime stats that were tabled yesterday, the numbers are alarming. Now, in a bid to change the behaviour, the Gauteng Social Development Department will once again hold the SA Men Awards. And these awards recognise men who make a positive contribution in society. And of course, there's been a lot of talk around positive masculinity. Let's speak to Mbali Hlophe, who is the Gauteng Social Development Department MEC. MEC, thank you so much for your time this evening. Now, tomorrow, of course, marks the beginning of the 16 days campaign, and this coincides with the Men's Awards. Let's talk about the significance of honouring the men tomorrow.
As you know, I mean, with the high GBV rates that we have, I mean, President has even gone as far as characterizing GBV as a second pandemic. So it's important that we acknowledge men who really want to stand out and raise their voice, and not only just about raising their voice, but also in their conduct, to speak against that which we're seeing, because it truly is horrific that women have gotten to a point where it's not disasters that they're fearful of. It's not illnesses per se, but it's men that you end up having to grow to be fearful of because of the shocking rates of GBV, rape that goes up, the violence and so forth. So when there are men that really take a stand to say this is not a representation of who we are, and at least in our great majority, they want to come out so that they can be distinguished from this unfortunate rates and in terms of GBV and those that are perpetrators. So it's really about motivating individuals, young and old, with positive examples and people, as you were correctly saying, positive masculinity, to appreciate that we may be different in terms of gender, but essentially equality must really be the hallmark of how we are to engage, and there is no lesser than in terms of that. And these are men who have an appreciation of that and really want to work together and make sure that they are able to be that positive example to take to society.
And when one looks at, some of the posters that have been put out here, there's, 365 days of transforming men, and really often what we hear is issues around a lack of accountability when it comes to the behavior of, some of the men, as we are seeing play out in the public domain. How do these awards begin to change that? Because it's not only just about tomorrow night, is it?
Not at all, and that's why they're called 365, because it's a year-round thing, and it's about males being able to recognize and be a positive role model, particularly with the type of society that we ought to build, and understand that GBV is not something that we should accept and tolerate. So it's about holding people accountable of their conduct. I'm just thinking about the social media issue that's going on right now, where one of the actresses had to really call out her own son. So it's about also calling them out and saying, this is not how you conduct yourself, and we won't tolerate it, whether you are close to me, you're my son, and so forth. But it's about making people to be accountable for their acts. And that's why we call it 365, so that people have an appreciation that it's an everyday thing. It's not an event, it's not a once-off thing where you think that you can only be good for a particular day. It's really continuous work. And it's important that you have these males that are coming out from the various sectors. I mean, we look at males from whether you're in sport, you are in health, you are in construction, and so forth and so forth. And we look at the different sectors that are there and the great models of males that are there, so that we're able to have a generation of young people that can be inspired by them, so that they can be able to turn the tide on what we're seeing as horrific stats.
And MEC, how are they chosen? Because I'm sure someone is watching tonight and would say, next year, I would love to be part of this. How do you then begin to go about this?
So it's a call out to the public, and people just need to nominate the individuals. You just send out what it is that they're doing that's great, what you think it is that should be celebrated in them, with whatever sector that they're in. As you know, that we look at health, we look at sports, we look at social development, youth development, and so forth. And they are able to submit their profiles, and we make our social media platforms open for everybody so that they're able to apply accordingly. And it's a fair process, and it's a nice competition to have, where males are able to aspire each other And even though you don't make it, but you still know that you really are a great example. And the fact that someone could put your name up and indicate that they think that you're someone that must be celebrated is the biggest achievement of anything for the individuals.
And, you know, tomorrow, when one thinks about the 16 Days campaign, often you'd hear activists saying that this is all just talk and sometimes it doesn't even yield to any action. One of the issues, though, that the activists particularly raise over time is this issue of, you know, shelters, particularly where abused women are concerned that some of them stay in these relationships because they lack the financial means to be then independent. Is this a huge focus for your department this month?
It's massive. It truly is massive. Because if you look at your GBV cases, a lot of the women that remain in these relationships, as you correctly say, is due to their own socioeconomic standing. And so if someone is dependent on an abuser or a perpetrator financially, a lot of the time the women have to bear the brunt. And they do it for their kids because they know that they'll end up on the street and no one wants to be homeless. And so, you know, as a way to stay away from what they consider embarrassment and also not being able to provide for their kids and having everybody now know what's happening to you, a lot of them, you know, hide in what should be safe spaces, but it really becomes spaces of horror. Because here's a woman confined in this and what should be a warm and loving home, but is really quite horrific and is the experience that she has to endure on a daily basis, either for herself or even for those of her offspring. So it's unfortunate, and part of the things that we look into is that when you speak about liberation, you really need to be, and you can't divorce it from economic liberation. So we have a lot of projects that are particularly geared at women, and one of them would be our welfare to work, and we have this even within our shelters. We equipped women with skills, and we've got a plethora of the various things that they can get into. So if someone is interested in construction aspects like plumbing, welding, and so forth, they can be able to get training within that. If they're interested in agriculture, as you know, our departments have combined now, they can be also able to go into agriculture, get given the skills on not only how to provide sustenance for themselves, but also can take it commercially. If you look at other areas like making pads, making tissues, etc. So we really have opened it up and are adding more areas and avenues for skills development so that women are able to stand on their own. And you never have to be forced because of your socioeconomic standing to really put up with the worst, simply because you have nowhere else to go. And that's a critical part of their liberation.
Pardon me, MEC, for coming in there. And you know, one of the things that you mentioned is the making of pads. And one thinks about period poverty. And when we talk about this particular campaign, that is also another aspect where women need to also be liberated in order to be able to get access to these for free. How far are we as a province in making sure that that happens?
So as you know, that our department is, and also the department at national level and throughout the provinces, our departments do provide what we call dignity packs. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't only just have your pads and it's also got your lotion, it's got your toiletries. And we give these out quite a lot within schools. If you consider the amount of young girls that don't go to school when they're going through their periods, it's even worse when you consider that as these young kids are developing and their bodies are changing and so forth, and they begin to gain odor on their armpits, etc. It's very important that you provide them with things that don't further create problems for them to be subject to bullying or deal with their confidence and so forth. So that's why we create this dignity pack. It's about providing dignity to them so that they can feel and look like everybody else, despite the socioeconomic background that they come from. But at least with that toolkit, it allows them to be able to deal with issues that at that age can be quite detrimental to one's confidence.
And definitely that is, you know, really critical, a point that we end off on, though, because you think about some of them, it's a choice between buying bread and a pack of sanitary pads. Thank you so much, MEC, for your time. I do appreciate it this evening. That is Mbali Hlophe, the Gauteng Social Development Department MEC.